grandmothers, usually cute, old, wrinkly ladies that love baking pies, but some like to dabble in other activities and giggle while doing it. Hello, fledglings, and welcome to Stories and Sass. I tell you an old or maybe new tale, and you sit back and relax. Listen and let your imaginative juices flow as I explain the tale of the Giggling Granny. Now, many of you might be from my main channel. Can I get a... If you're from my main channel, and how about a... if I just came up on your For You page. But if you're from my main page, then you know that true crime, especially murderous ones, kind of freak me out. I used to absolutely love it, got really into it, and then it just kind of tanked my mental health very deeply. And I casted it out of my life until I found the story of the Giggling Granny. When I found this smiling granny, it just kept making me scroll back and then back down away from her, and then back, and then back down away from her, and then back, because it looks like my grandmother. And I was like, why is this woman smiling so hard? It's endearing, and yet creepy. I had to read about her, and since I did, well, I gotta tell someone about it. The smiling granny, the giggling granny's actual name is Nancy Nanny Doss Hazel. She was born to a family of farmers in 1905 in Blue Mountain, Alabama. She did not go to school and did not get an education. Instead, back in the day, she and her 3 siblings would stay at home to work on the family farm and do their daily household chores. You know, get them ready for the real world of farming and cleaning dishes. No need for that pesky education back then. Unfortunately, her childhood was not a happy one, joyful, or exciting. It was horrible because of Nancy's father, Jim Hazel. He was cruel, abusive, and anything else that you can think of. It was speculated and implied that Jim Hazel was the one that forced all his kids, all 4 of his children, from attending any school. You know, he doesn't want them to get educated, and instead kept them working on the farm for extremely long periods of time, day after day after day. And he would also prevent the girls from attending any type of social events. Keep that in mind, especially the girl. Shockingly though, her mother, Louisa Hazel, was a lot more better and not as horrible as the dad. Like by a long shot, actually. She was more loving. She was gentler with Nancy and her siblings. At least when my researcher was researching, she said that there were even more suggestions that her father might not even be related biologically at all. And so maybe that's why he also had some very angry interactions with the children. So now we're at age 7, where Nancy would ride a train and unfortunately suffer an extreme head injury that would change her life indefinitely. And keep in mind, head injuries are extremely life-changing. I grew up in a football family. Contact sports are absolutely no joke. Shout out to people that got hit in the head when you were young and constantly got hit in the head as you grew up. It takes a toll on you. My children aren't allowed to play any contact sports. Isn't that right, boys? So Nancy's injury had occurred when the train had just abruptly stopped, causing her to hit her head on a metal train seat. So you know when a vehicle stops and you go like that, and she was a little girl, she probably has no control over her body or to put her hand right there. According to Nancy herself, she would claim that this head injury would become the very source of her horrendous future. Nancy would get these severe headaches constantly through the day because of this injury, and in this addition to a cruel upbringing, it seemed to be, as she claimed, her reason as to why she'd kind of turned out the way that she did. Apparently, headaches can drive a girl crazy. Nancy was also said to be completely obsessed with romance magazine. The Lonely Hearts columns were her absolute favorite when she grew up, but her father has strictly forbidden any of his 4 daughters, from wearing dresses, clothes, makeup, anything that made them feel pretty. It was a no. And you know, in those romantic books, the girls are always wearing, you know, the loose curl, the bountiful fluffy dress, the makeup. And Nancy really wanted that. She wanted to feel romance, which was a no-no in this house. She wanted to feel beautiful, also a no-no. It was only chores, farm work, that's it. Don't even think about opening a book. And you know what happens to extremely closed out children when they start to grow up? Some continue to stay under the thumb of their parents, and others decide to just pry that thumb up and go buck wild. So once out of that abusive household, Nancy would be insisted on finding both romance and glamour for herself. She wanted to feel gorgeous and, you know, get that extremely lovable romance that she reads in all of those early romantic type books. So finally, at 16 years old, she would get married to her husband. Well, her first husband, Charlie Braggs, who was approved actually by her father. So how did this extremely sheltered girl, but very interested in romance, woman, well, girl, she's 16, find her husband? Where did they meet? Well, they met at her first job. She actually ended up working at a linen thread company in Anniston. And these two knew, baby, they knew that they had something special. They would marry within the first few months of their meeting. They would have 4 daughters between 1923 and 1927, and the family would live with her husband's mother. And that sounds all very nice, right? People always say back in the day, people always lived with their families. It takes a village. It's wonderful to have such a close-knit family. No, not for Nancy. Living with Charlie's mother would lead to an extreme amount of stress in the household. Stressful because once Nancy moves in with Charlie's mom, she noticed that, well, Charlie's mother has a few personality traits that are very similar to her father. And the stress must have been extremely intense because in 1927, 2 of Nancy's daughters would just die suddenly from what was known as food poisoning back then. And after the death of Nancy's 2 daughters, this is where her murderous tendencies started to begin. Everyone took the death of Nancy's daughters as it was food poisoning. It was an accident. It was something that was just a freak thing that happened. Let's pray and move on. But Nancy's husband was suspicious. It just didn't seem right to him. And eventually, you know, the stress and whatever, and the death of 2 daughters, Charlie said, you know what? I don't want to do this. He left Nancy and took the other daughter with him. 1 daughter. He did not trust Nancy, and reports have said that people told him, you might not want to eat your wife's food. Just saying, you might just, you know, get takeout. And this would save his life. Unfortunately though, there were 4 daughters. 2 were dead, 1 he had, and 1 a newborn, which he had to leave with Nancy and his mother. Charlie would move away with the eldest daughter. Nancy would stay with Charlie's mother with the newborn. And by 1928, the pair would divorce, and Charlie's mother would suddenly die. The death of Charlie's mother had him coming back to his childhood home. He didn't return back with just his daughter, no. Charlie had a new lover, Melvina. It has been said that Nancy didn't really like all of that, so it was a little awkward, especially because Charlie wanted Nancy out of his childhood home. And he wanted to be there with Melvina. So Nancy would take her daughters and return to living with her parents, and she would work at the nearby cotton mill to make a living for both herself and the children that were left. She was living an honest life, a simple life, but then she would meet her second husband, Frank Carlson. I hope I'm saying that right, Frank. I'm so sorry because of what happened next, especially because of what happened next. Nancy met Frank through a Lonely Hearts newspaper column. He would romance her with poetry, and she would respond in earnest with steamy photos, and a lot of steamy letters. The pair would then marry pretty quickly in 1929, but Nancy would soon find that things were less than stellar, and the romance, it was lacking. Very quickly after they got married, Nancy found out that Frank is, he's an alcoholic. And with that, it got paired with a very violent temper, once again, mirroring her own father. So during the period of Nancy's marriage where her husband is this raging alcoholic and reminding her of her father, there would be family members just dying. Young ones, actually. At this point, Nancy is a grandmother, and one of her newborn grandchildren were found with pins to their brain, dead. A 2-year-old grandson of Nancy's would die of asphyxia, and both of these grandchildren were left under Nancy's care. Asphyxia, by the way, is horrifying. It's when you pretty much make the baby not be able to breathe. Nancy's marriage to Frank would last about 16 years, way more than I thought that would last. So Frank would come home one night, drunk as ever, like normal, and he came home from spending the night with his friends who had returned from their service in World War II. He would come home, see Nancy, force her to have intercourse, and then, according to Nancy herself, from her words, from her Giggling Granny mouth, the very next day, Nancy poured rat poison into one of his jars of moonshine. You like to drink so much, Frank? Drink that. Frank Carlson would die on September 5th, 1945. But at cause of death, food poisoning, but we knew what it was. According to reports that with all the abusive men in Nancy's life, she began to take matters into her own hands. I'm not sure why she was killing the children, but that's why she was killing the men? I'm not sure. And her favorite method of taking people out was just rat poisoning. Eventually, she got a little rabid with this rat poisoning thing and thinking every single man in her life is horrible. She kind of went off the deep end, finding fault with every single one of them and becoming nothing more than a reaper when she found anything slightly wrong with a man. It's been said that she was doing this so often because it felt like she was getting her revenge since she had a very horrible life and upbringing. So after Frank's death, Nancy's death toll was 5, but she wasn't done yet. She had more rat poisoning drinks to do. Artie Lanning of Lexington, North Carolina, Nancy's next victim of choice. These two would also meet via an ad in a local Lonely Hearts column again. I think at the time that was their online dating site. You know how your parents always say don't meet someone online, like romantically, because there'll definitely be a murder. Well, the Giggling Granny was on those things and she was a murderer. So for Artie's concoction, she would also use rat poisoning, but this time she would taint one of Artie's meals with the poison rather than a drink. But they listed Artie's death as heart failure because he drank a lot, and so they said, well, he drank a lot, obviously he's dead, it has to be the alcohol. And I'm pretty sure when Nancy heard this verdict of his death, she probably sat in that corner giggling, calling everybody stupid. She got away with it again. Especially back then, they didn't have a lot of forensic things going on, and at the time of his death, there was a whole flu going around, so his death wasn't exactly the most suspicious thing at the time. Plus, to the residents in Lexington, Nancy had the look of the perfect spouse. She was cute, she was nice, she could talk, and she always smiled with a little bit of giggle. Yeah, so around this whole time too, it is also alleged that Nancy burnt down Artie's mom's house while Artie's mom was inside. So after taking Artie's life in 1950, alongside burning Artie's mother's house down, along with Artie's mom, she would then go off and live alongside her sister, Dovie. So Dovie would pass away so suddenly after Nancy arrived, just, randomly, which led to people starting to get suspicious. Everywhere Nancy goes, someone's house burns down, someone's heart decides to fail, babies start dying, so now the suspicion is starting to get up. People are raising their flags, people are watching. But Nancy would continue doing her thing, smiling, giggling, and she would attract a man named Richard L. Morton. And that would be her next victim / husband. Once again, Nancy would find Richard on that Lonely Hearts column. Yes, you got it right. And they would get married in Kansas in 1952, but it didn't take long for him to stray from his marriage. He had a wandering eye, and Nancy didn't like that. That's not gonna fly with Nancy. Richard would head into town day after day for extensive periods of times with multiple women, and at the time, Nancy had her hands very full with her own, mother. So she wasn't paying attention that much, or she couldn't get to him quick as she got to the other people because she had to take care of her mom, who had come to live with her and Richard after Nancy's abusive father had passed away. And Nancy's mom broke her hip, so they were trying to find a caretaker because it was just way too much for Nancy. She had other things she had to take care of. So the stress, when Nancy gets stressed, it gets bad. And she was just a stressed out, grinning granny. She just needs to, make a drink. Within days of Nancy's mom living with the couple, Nancy's mother would report saying that her stomach really, really hurt. She was getting some intense stomach pains. These stomach pains turned into, death. Nancy's mom died. After Nancy's mother's death, she didn't have to take care of her anymore, so her schedule opened up quite a bit, and she had time for a lot more other activities, like paying attention to Richard's numerous affairs. One day, Nancy, being the caretaker mother that she is, would joyfully give Richard a hot, steaming cup of coffee. Shortly after, Richard would die. You guessed it. She spiked it with arsenic. Is she done yet? No. Just a little bit more. With those additional murders under her belt, Nancy would board a bus to meet her last suitor, Samuel Doss, in Tixom, Oklahoma. Oklahomans, I'm very sorry if I said that wrong. I know nothing about Oklahoma, except that's where Nancy went to go meet Samuel. June 1953, about a year later after murdering her mother and Richard, she would marry Samuel Doss. It's very important to take note that Samuel Doss was not abusive at all. He was not an alcoholic and didn't have a wandering eye like Richard, but even then, Nancy would find issues with him. Apparently, her problem was that Samuel was very controlling when it came to certain magazines. He would ban any type of magazine that didn't meet his criteria of enlightening or educational. So that is kind of problematic, right? That's a little, who the fuck are you, Samuel? Instead of killing him at first, Nancy would leave him for like a very small amount of time just to show like a protest, like, I can leave you just so you know if you're gonna be acting all like that. But then in a show of love and a way to win his woman back, Samuel decided to put her name on a bank account. And then even took out 2 life insurance policies, with Nancy as the beneficiary, of course. The couple would reunite. Their love was back on. They were in love again. Nancy said he's the perfect man to kill. Nancy quickly got to work. Murder attempt number 1. Do you like cake? Do you like prunes? Do you like them together? She made a prune cake and tried to lace it with arsenic. This actually ended in failure. Yes, Samuel ate the cake, but it didn't kill him. He spent a very long month recovering in the hospital from it. When she returned home, Nancy would insist, though, that she would return to her typical method of just lacing a drink instead. And this time, it was the coffee again. And Samuel would take it. He drank the coffee and he would pass away as well. Finally though, Samuel's death was the final death of men marrying Nancy and drinking her damn coffee or frickin' cakes. Finally, Samuel Doss's 1954 murder put an end to Nanny, or the Giggling Granny, Doss's 27-year killing spree. Turns out someone was already quite suspicious of Nancy when Samuel ended up in the hospital the first time. But this person just needed some fundamental proof to finally get her. And finally, he did. That said suspicious individual, a local doctor who performed a proper autopsy and discovered an unbelievable amount of arsenic in Samuel's system. Who the hell was doing all of the stuff to the other dead guys and the dead babies and the children? I don't know what the protocol was for back in the day, but this doctor said he was only able to perform the autopsy after convincing Nancy that it would help save future lives if he could determine her late husband's cause of death. So Nancy was actually the one to expose herself. She gave the doctor the okay, like a fool. And people were especially interested in the Samuel case because in this one, they found it very interesting that she put so much arson inside his body or in his cup of coffee because he seemed to be mostly not like the other men that she dated. To quote, according to the doctor, he would describe the amount of arson in this man's body enough to kill a horse. And so this doctor would rightfully report all of this to the police, and shortly after, Nancy would be arrested and charged with murder. At the time that Nancy got arrested, they thought that she only killed one person. No. Boy, were they surprised to find out how busy Nancy has been through the years. Nancy Nanny Doss Hazel was first arrested for the murder of one husband, Samuel Doss, in 1954. And once arrested, Nancy would just confess to multiple crimes, not just Samuel's death, but all of them, as far as we know. The interrogation of Nancy was pretty simple. It didn't take much to get out of her. Nancy pretty much confessed to all of the crimes just because they offered to give her a romance magazine, something that I guess she wasn't allowed to read because it wasn't educational enough for Samuel, and remember, Daddy didn't let her read those either, so they offered her one of those and she said, okay, I'll tell you everything. After having her confession, police would exhume said bodies. Autopsies would confirm that they did indeed die of rat poisoning. They finally, did their job and did the autopsies. And well, she stayed very consistent with that. But they finally got Nancy at the age of 48 in Oklahoma, and they found her guilty of murder. Hi, I'm Michelle again, and I don't mean to talk about anybody's looks, but she murdered people. And I just had to say, that is a hard 48. The State Justice Department of North Carolina, Kansas, Alabama also charged her for murder. But she was never set to trial outside of Oklahoma. So what were the repercussions of this? Would she rot in jail? Would she get the electric chair? What would happen to Nancy? So initially, Nancy was supposed to be given the death sentence once found guilty of murder. And yeah, she was supposed to face the electric chair and almost became the first woman in the history of Oklahoma to be executed. But 2 years later, after the judge had later declared Nancy insane, it was taken away and Nancy was spared. According to the judge that made this decision, he didn't want to set a poor precedent by taking a woman's life, especially a woman with a mental issue, which I definitely have my opinions on, because this woman had mental issues who knew exactly what she was doing as she was doing it and planned everything out and knew that it was wrong enough to not go tell people. Anyway, Nancy received life in prison instead. And you know what? People at the time were so sick because they realized that Nancy appeared downright gleeful, happy, ecstatic. There's so many pictures of her smiling as she's getting arrested. And this picture right here is the one that really got me interested in why is this old lady so excited? She seems just so proud of herself. Hi, editing Michelle here. I'm just looking at old pictures of the Giggling Granny, and this is when she got arrested. She looks so happy. But then you like zoom out and look at everybody, like look at these two people. They are scared out of their minds that this woman is in their vicinity. This man right here, frightened. This guy was kind of intrigued by her because, you know, I guess she had what a lot of men wanted, but she looks so excited that people know what she did. Well, it turns out because she learned that she killed all the men that she hated in her life, the children that did something to her in her life, and now she gets to sit in a cell and read romantic magazines as much as she wants. Of course she's giggling. Actually, it is said that when she was reporting all of the murders that she did, she was smiling, happy, giddy. And that's where the nickname, the Giggling Granny, came to be. Whenever she was asked about her crimes, she would constantly smile, giggle, and would ultimately blame all of it, all because she had that injury on the train that one day when it abruptly stopped. 2 years into her life sentence in the prison, though, Nancy began to complain a bit. She said that she would rather have been put to death instead of being in jail. So that brings me a little bit of joy that she didn't get what she wanted, at least in this case. However, according to people who worked in the jail and other inmates, Nancy remained unnervingly cheery and happy and giggly. It's been said that she tended to joke about her own case, you know, just joking it up, kikiing with the other inmates. She actually did an interview about her life in prison, and she would talk about despite all of her efforts, they would not let her work in the kitchen. They would always decline her. I wonder why. So her only job in prison was to do the laundry. So you're probably wondering, well, how did Nancy die? Did she get a horrible death? Nice, slow, and painful? Maybe a little bit of rat poison in someone put into her food? Well, Nancy would die, but she would die of leukemia. I didn't read anything on how or if it was like painful or like quick, fast, what, I don't know, but she did die of leukemia. And after her death, even though she was a horrible person, she still got a memorial in Oak Hill Memorial Park in McAlester, Oklahoma. If you're in Oklahoma, you can go give her a visit. But that was the tale of the Giggling Granny, and it all started because I saw that big Cheshire smile of a face on Facebook as I scrolled. I knew something was eerie about her. I could tell with that smile. Who smiles like that while they're getting arrested? The Giggling Granny does. This story kept me up at night because I was just so intrigued by that smile, and I knew that it was going to be gross when I clicked on the story. And well, I was right. Everything about this woman was horrifying, from the smile to, well, the murder. Thank you so much for watching me for this episode of Stories and Sass, and watch out for those grannies, because just because someone's old doesn't mean they're sweet and baking you a pie that's not full of arsenic.